كليوين نوافولكي بركات دارو سيناكا قلتان سنة أمازيغ بركات دارو ماسنو ورزو الديداكتيكي دي غواسنو سقمي غتينا وتاد اللي غرات ساول دار نغيت نبقيت اللي إسكارن إسنو بوش ندير زوت نخفو السلمد نتو تلايين راه داخت ساول غصاد فيانو وسنتل باهرة إلى نتيك ورتا نسمني نقدر تنقدم إمتن راه نفكاوالي سيزوار تنميرتي مسن بداد نسينا قلنا نتو سنة أمازيغت اللي غيوسن أفاد دمس بد تيوري وين نون مقارد تنميرتي مس أنفلوس ماتاي فتويسينت ولان تغنتا في اختوري وناد غيلا تنميرتي مس أنمهال نواماس تنميرت نمكن ياكل لي ديوش كان غصاد هاد فغوالي مس أنبداد نسينا قلنا نتو سنة أمازيغت أي نورزن أن مقارد. First, I would like to thank the director of our institute for his support of our work in the Center of Didactic Research and Pedagogical Programs. I would like also to thank the Secretary, Mr. Secretary General of the Institute for his also contribution to this work. I would like to say welcome again to our guest, Professor Kountun Lili and Professor Lili to the Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture. Then I give you the floor first, just the first words before you present your talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here today and to be able to share time with all of you. I'm very grateful to the director of the Royal Institute for his support and for see if we can get that all coordinated. Awesome. And for all of the people who have welcomed me here so nicely. These are precious moments for me to spend and for me to learn. So I'm very grateful to be here with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the director of our institute. Thank you again.
Just a few words. Dear Mr. Compton, Dr. Lili, okay.
Dr. Compton Lili.
Compton Lili, okay. It's a great honor to welcome you both at the Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture, and I would like to thank you, Mrs. Compton Lili, for agreeing to be with us and share with us your experience with indigenous people in United States and maybe somewhere else. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
تنميرت مسن بدد. Thank you, Mr. Director of the Institute. Now I would like to give the floor to the director of the Center of Didactic Research and Pedagogical Programs to present our guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. the President. تنميرت مسا الله مسن بدد نسيق قدن تسنة أمازيغ مسن سيخ أمتاي أيتمدي استماع إلي نودو رمقران ولا نكينا دونينيغ سومتا كويان سيسم النس كويان استزولت النس لا كني ولا يمضفارن ولا تيمضفارين ندا غادي تناين سيسارو ومطون نيوتيوب مرحبا يسون يونا نمكار مسن ندا يسلملا وسينغا قلدان تسنة أمازيغت حما نساول خفيان يير ناي دي توهم شي قالنا سينا قلت انتو سنة تمازيغت إجراديات تغرست نزاد نسكون غاد نزاد نبنو مشينا نتيني إدليس إن ملال نسلم نتو تلاين نمال تلاين تيدغرانين أيان نتينا وتنخفر هذا خديتاوي مسا كاترين كام طليلي نغدي دانس توسداويت ساوث كارولينا ثلاثة ختيني في التبريد الناس سكون نيتني إلسان إن ملالن نيتوسن يمزيان حما هاد المدن تتلين نسن تدغرانين تغرستان غد تبريتا نكني وتنسين شي نيتمازيرتنا المغرب مشى نوفا بأنه تيايا التبريد إغودان نايغين هادشي تيافوت يزيلن تسلمت النخ تنجبيو النخ ثم قرنت مسا كمثل ليلي السا ترى غادي تخطبضو او ديال تيافوت نرزون سدوس نوبشنس ناثيا إجرا دغي مشيت السرفم ري غاد بر مغيلس هذا صغي ما يدنيخ ستوتليت تمازيغت حما الترمس او تنجبيو النخ اعزان ما يدنا هذا خص ستوتليت انجليزيت راهو نتينيخ مرحبا يسون تيكلتياد. So I will try to translate what I have said in English. So, Mr. Rector of the Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture, Mr. Secretary General, Professor Katarin Lili, distinguished colleagues, dear guests, it is a great honor and absence pleasure to welcome you all today to the Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture for this prestigious academic event. We are deeply privileged to host Professor Katarin Lili, one of the foremost scholars in the field of literacy, language education, and community-based learning. Professor Katarin Lili, currently Professor of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of South Carolina, has devoted her academic career to exploring the interactive relationship between language, identity, and literacy practices within families and communities. Her longitudinal and ethnographic researches have significantly contributed to understanding how education can more meaningfully engage with cultural and linguistic validity of our learners. As you can see on the handout provided, Professor Katarin Lili distinguished academic background and selected publication reflect a deep and sustained engagement with question of literacy, equity, and community collaboration. Her lecture today, entitled Working with Communities to Create Books for Young Children in Support of Local Language, embodies a pedagogical vision that develops from the ground up, recognizing community as essential partner in creating cultural relevant knowledge and education materials. This bottom-up approach to curriculum development provides a valuable perspective for reflection in the Moroccan education context, where curriculum design has largely been guided by institutional and policy frameworks. Professor Katarin Lili's work thus invite us to consider how community participation and local linguistics resources might further enrich Amazigh language education and contribute to more inclusive and dynamic curriculum practices. On behalf of the CERDPP teams, I wish to express our deep gratitude to Mr. Rector and Mr. Secretary General for their constant support of the Institute's academic and cultural initiatives. We also extend our warmest thanks to Professor Kاترين for joining us and sharing her valuable insights. As I will to conclude, we cannot thank you enough for your kindness. Thank you.
تنميرت مس بن عيسى الان سوالي مكنت مازيغتي مكنت نجليزت we'll switch between Amazigh and English, so we'll try to translate what we say in English and in Amazigh. So welcome again, and we are delighted to receive Professor Kaatrien Lilly, who will be talking about working with communities to create books for young children in support of local languages. Professor Kaatrien Lilly has worked on this issue a long time ago. She's known as the director said, she is known of her work about longitudinal studies on especially indigenous languages. She worked with the community of Cherokee in South Carolina, and she worked also with a community in Taiwan. So she will elaborate about this experiment of working with the community of Taiwan to create books for children to support these local languages. تسلمت النغرة تسولخ في ينست البهري إلى نتيج تسول في إمداني مزورة اللي ديت سوري فدت تسكر إدليسن إن ملان إتزانين أفدت أقران تتلين إنسن سلوانا كنت تتلين نمدن لي دروسنين تيما دروسين تسوري د أيت تايوان يا تتليت غير نعرف لا الساولة العرضنس غتينا وتنس تسوري ولا ديت ينوامون يضنين كرميد نيضنين غماسن ساوث كارولاينا نيفوس تتليت نس نسماس شيروكي تسوري ديس نفدت كريد ليسن إن ملان يتزانين نفدت لمدن تتليت نسن اللي باهري يدروس نرتسوال نغار سنا طيماد الميدن ورا باهراسي في السيغزيف غوال رات فغوالي مسا كونتون ليلي افدت تساول في تغاوسي ويناد. Now I'll give the floor to Professor Kaatrien Lilly. Thank you.
Thank you again for having me here today. I'm very grateful to be able to share the information that I'm sharing today, and I want to thank all of the indigenous communities that have helped me to learn about their worlds and to learn about their languages, and to give me an opportunity to help them to promote what they know and what they understand. So if we could bring up the PowerPoint, there it is. So I'm going to talk today about 2 bilingual book projects conducted in 2 different parts of the world. One of the reasons I am here is to learn about what you are doing with Amazigh language, and to think about how I can learn from you, but also to share some of the things that have been happening. The work I am sharing today was done in collaboration with people in other places, so I need to thank Dr. Ching-Ting Xin for her work at National Tsinghua University in Taiwan, and my colleague and friend Anna Howard at the University of South Carolina, who is a fluent and native Cherokee speaker, and she helped me with that project. So I will be talking to you about these 2 projects. Our Indigenous bookmaking project had one, so these are the people that helped us with this. There's one system that we used in both parts of the world to make the books. So we took the same basic procedure and used it in 2 different spaces. One collaborative book project is designed to sustain a Taya language, which is an indigenous Taiwanese language, and the other one is to sustain Cherokee language, which is an indigenous language in North America, which is in the area where I live now. Historically, it was in South Carolina. So the basic project that we did in both spaces was to identify a group of indigenous leaders, generally people who we had worked with in the past, but also people that they recommended, meet with them and describe to them the project and our interest in creating books for them and with them. So our job was to listen very carefully to them as Indigenous leaders and have them identify what they would like to have represented in the books. So when we created the books, we did not start with things that we thought were important. Instead, we started with things that the local people, that the Indigenous leaders felt was important. So they chose the topics for each book. They chose the languages represented in the books. They chose the language structures, the vocabulary, and the images, the pictures that we used in the books were also based on what they told us that they wanted for their children. So it was very much a project that was dedicated to representing what they wanted us to present to their children. After we had talked to the Indigenous leaders, we drafted books. We created examples of the books that we would like to, that we hoped would represent their ideas. But we asked them for feedback. And whenever they told us something that we got wrong or that we needed to change, we changed it. So we got a lot of feedback from the leaders saying, oh, this is not quite right, or you need to change that, or this picture is wrong. And we took that information and created revised books. And we brought the revised books back to the Indigenous leaders, and sometimes they told us there were still things we needed to fix. So we would revise them again. And we continued to revise them until the Indigenous leaders told us that these were the books that they wanted for their children. Then we uploaded the books to a publicly available web space, and we added voice recordings by Indigenous people who are native to speaking those languages. We recorded a woman for each book and a man for each book so that children could hear the different gendered talk. We uploaded the voices and the books, and all of that can be downloaded for free in both the Cherokee community and in the Ataya Taiwanese community. So we were very intentional in not creating things that we would sell, but creating things that would be freely available to people in the two communities. So here were the research questions that we brought to the project. So in addition to making the books, we documented the process of making the books so that we could learn, and so that we could learn how to better interact with other communities that might want to do similar work. So what we asked was, how might a team of university professors work with Indigenous leaders to honor Native language and culture and to create texts for young children to counteract language loss in Indigenous communities? Then we asked, how were the texts used and received and understood by people in those communities? And then finally we asked, what lessons about literacy and language learning might we as schools, as scholars, learn from Indigenous community members? So those were our research questions that we brought to the project. So it's very important that I tell you a little bit about the books. The books are very, very, very simple. They are for children who are 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. They're for children who generally do not have a strong background in the language that we are teaching. So these are children who might be of Ataya heritage, but did not speak Ataya language, or children who might be of Cherokee heritage, but did not speak Ataya language. In many cases, their grandparents spoke the language, but in some cases, their parents did not. So this is a language that was being lost to the younger generations. So it was very important that we create books that are very, very simple so that they could learn not only vocabulary and words, but also grammatical structures. So this is an example of one of the books that we designed. The book, on each page, it has a question. Where are you going, grandfather? The next page, where are you going, mother? The next page, where are you going, father? The next page, where are you going, sister? This book was important for a couple reasons. One is the Indigenous communities, the Ataya community in Taiwan, they wanted the children to know the words for grandmother, grandfather, mother, father. Those are important words. Those were very important words to the people that we were working with to create those books. But you will also notice that every sentence starts with, where are you going? Because we were trying to teach the children, yatas musa sunyu. So we were trying to teach them that phrase, where are you going? For two reasons. One, so they could read this book and learn how to learn the vocabulary, learn the words, but also because the phrase, where are you going, is very useful in life. They can use that phrase on a daily basis with their parents or with other children or with their grandmother or their grandfather. They could use these sentences. We wanted to give them language that not only would they use in order to read the book, but also that they could use in their daily life and their everyday interactions. Our goal was to teach them a few words, a few phrases, and then hope that that became a framework, a foundation on which they could learn more and more language by interacting with people who spoke those languages. Okay, so it's a very simple format for very young children who don't speak the language and trying to teach both vocabulary and syntactical structures. So our work with the Atayal people in Taiwan, we focus on listening and learning in order to identify the topics and the simple sentences to include. In particular, we were inspired to counteract, our goal was to counteract thousands of ways in which indigenous languages and cultures have been silenced or misrepresented, ridiculed, or condemned in academic and popular discourses. So this is a quote from a native speaker in an American community. But what we're arguing is that indigenous languages are important and they should not be lost, and that they have been misrepresented and not treated well, especially in school systems. As a matter of fact, in both Taiwan and in the United States, teachers were not allowed to use indigenous languages with children in schools until recently. So we have a long history of silencing those languages, and that has contributed to language loss. So in this book, in this paper, we examine the collaborative process of designing and creating books, as well as we work with tribal leaders, parents, and teachers, and their responses to the books. So these are pictures of me and some of my colleagues in Taiwan. Most of the people in the pictures are indigenous leaders, and in some cases, the tribal chiefs are represented there. So important that we work with the people and listen to them. So we worked in two communities. One was an Atayal community that was near Taipei. So Taipei is a major city with skyscrapers and trains and all of those sorts of things. It is a major city, and this community was just outside of Taipei. So in this community, there was a lot of language loss. Very few parents spoke Atayal. A few grandparents did, but the schools were working to reestablish Atayal language in Atayal communities. There was another community that we worked with that was way up in the mountains. This Atayal community had been isolated from Western culture and had maintained its cultural and linguistic practices. So most of the parents in this community spoke Atayal, and most of the children had some Atayal that they had learned from their parents. There was much less Chinese spoken, so it was much more of an indigenous community. This community was so isolated that they did not have electricity until about the year 2000. So they've only had electricity for about 25 years here. It's a very remote community. So in each community, we recruited people based on people we already knew, and they recommended people. We recruited people in each community. So in the, So in the community outside of Taipei, we recruited language teachers, a missionary who had deep roots in the local community, a traditional weaver, a local writer who served as an official in the local government. These were all Atayal people. In the village, we included the chief of the village, the chair of the Department of Education for the village, and a language teacher and 3 teachers in the daycare center. Again, all people that had strong affinity to the Ataya culture. In both sites, I worked with my colleagues and with the Ataya leaders to identify the book topics, the images, the languages, and the vocabulary and phrases to be used in the texts. These are the books we created. The books on the top were created in collaboration with both communities. Both communities wanted the book about where are you going, what is this, which is about identifying animals, traditional weaving, and traditional ways of planting millet. So those books were agreed on by both communities, and they wanted all those books. However, there were some books that were specific to each community. So the community outside of Taipei, they wanted books about everyday things because they wanted their children to be able to learn phrases that they could use in everyday practices. They were very strong on that. So they wanted a book about food, traditional food, and they wanted a book about the weather because the weather is very important in daily life. So those 2 books were created for the community outside of Taipei, but the community in the remote village, they wanted 2 other different books. Interestingly enough, they wanted a book about being careful. One of the practices in the remote village is that when the parents go to work, the children are on their own. Even young children are often unsupervised or supervised only by older children. So they wanted a book about being careful. So this book talks about being careful with electricity, being careful when climbing trees, being careful when running around. So it has all kinds of little messages about being careful, and they very much wanted that book. The other book they wanted was about things made from bamboo. When you go to visit this village, they have buildings made of bamboo, they have farm utensils made of bamboo, they have cutlery and dishware made of bamboo. So they wanted to celebrate and to show all the things that could be made with bamboo. So we tried to be very responsive to both communities. Sometimes they agreed and they wanted the same books. Other times they had different requests, and we honored those requests. Again, I just want to return to this slide for a moment to emphasize that these are very simple books for very young children, and again, trying to teach both vocabulary and syntactical structures. So here I want to talk about some of the challenges we faced in creating the books and some of the feedback that we got from the tribal leaders. So in some cases, we created the book with particular wordings that some of the Ataya leaders had suggested, and we shared the books online with the Ataya leaders, and we asked them to choose which sentence was best. So we would take the same sentence and we would write it using slightly different vocabulary, because different people we talked to had different preferences for what language we would use. So we wrote maybe 3 sentences using slightly different wordings, and we asked the members to respond to our postings and decide which wordings were the best, which wordings they liked most. And they were, then we, once we had their opinions, we circulated their opinions among the different tribal members from both communities, and we shared them online and got more feedback. So we gave them some choices, they chose, and then we had a sense of what they preferred. However, in some cases, there was not agreement, and we ended up making 2 versions of some of the books for the 2 different communities. So you remember there were 4 books on the top that we used for both communities. In some cases, those books were actually different because different communities wanted different words and wanted different wordings. So I'll give you an example here. Tribal leaders in Fushi proposed books related to weather and food. And in Fushi, the indigenous people live in small towns alongside people of Han heritage. Many of the indigenous children in Fuji did not have parents who spoke Ataya. So these are all some of the reasons that affected the things that they wanted. Because there was not a lot of Ataya language used, they wanted very useful language that could reflect people's everyday lives. As I said before, in the rural community, they wanted the book about being careful. So let me show you some of the differences that we had to work on. Oh, and they also wanted the books on weaving and planting millet. Okay. Ataya leaders discussed terminology for traditionally fermented food. So the book about food talked about fermented food. And there was some disagreement on this particular word. An Ataya language expert argued that the word we had used, timyan, referred to partially fermented products. And while this term is widely used by modern Ataya people, it's technically incorrect. He checked with knowledgeable elders and clarified that simyan was the correct term for completely fermented product. And after discussions with the tribal leaders across the two sites, both groups decided to use the historical term simyan in the book. When considering the book, we started out with a book that was not Where Are You Going? Where Are You Going is the book we originally wrote. But we started out writing a book called How Are You? And that book was phrases such as, how are you, mother? How are you, father? How are you, grandfather? Which we thought was a good way. And they were very excited about that book because they wanted the words mother, father, grandmother, grandfather in the book. However, when the tribal leaders saw the book, they said, this is not a good book. What they told us is that saying, how are you is a problematic term because that is only used when people have been sick and now they've gotten better. So if you ask, how are you, to a person who is not sick, you're implying that they might be sick. So they told us that was not an appropriate phrase to use. So after discussing these language norms, tribal leaders identified the question, where are you going, as a more appropriate question to be asking, that could also be combined with the Ataya words for family members. So this is an example where traditional uses of language needed to be discussed and actually change the entire book because we had misrepresented or we had used language in a way that was not appropriate to the community. Here's another example. This has to do with the illustrations. So if you look at the illustration on the left, that is the first illustration that we presented to the tribal communities. And then when they saw that, they said, no, that is not correct. There is something missing. What we had not included in the diagram is something called a mouse-proof board. So these are the boards that are attached to the legs of the storage structure. So this is the storage structure for storing millet. And you have to have these little, you can see in the second picture, there's like little U-shaped wooden pieces there on the legs of the building. Those are to keep the mice out. And if you don't have mice-proof boards, the mice are going to eat your millet. So it was very important that when we created these images that we retain that cultural knowledge and that we represented the mouse-proof boards on the images, otherwise children would not realize how important that was. So this is one of the examples where the illustration that we created was not appropriate and had to be revised. Another example was we created a illustration of a tool that was used to frighten birds, and we had gotten the proportions wrong. So we had to fix that as well. So we got a lot of feedback from the tribal leaders telling us what we needed to do in order to make the books culturally appropriate for the children in their communities. So thinking about language and teaching, Satora and her colleagues argued that it was essential that educators and researchers attend to the voices and perspectives of Indigenous teachers when planning instruction for children. As they argued, it was not enough to create culturally and linguistically relevant books. It was also essential to attend to how teachers use those texts in classrooms with students. And as a result, we purposely gave the books to teachers and watched to see what they did with them. So in this next section of my presentation, I'm going to talk about how the teachers use the books and a little bit about what the children learn from the books. So prior to introducing the teachers in Taiwan to the books, we met with the teachers to describe the project and explain our language sustenance goals, and also to describe the involvement of the local Ataya leaders in the creation of the texts. We had 14 teachers in 5 kindergarten classrooms who started implementing the books in 2020. However, in 2020, somewhere around February or March, we had COVID. So our project was interrupted by COVID, and not all 14 teachers and not all 5 kindergartens are actually going to be presented in the data I will share with you. I'm going to share with you data from 2 classrooms that had successfully implemented the book program before COVID-19 closed the schools. Okay? So the teachers in these 2 classrooms use the books in different ways, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. So what we did is we visited the classrooms, we had the teachers videotape themselves teaching in the classrooms, and we looked at how the classrooms and the books were being used and how they seemed to, and the effects they seemed to be having on children's language learning. When we looked at the strategies the teachers used, we found 4 different kinds of strategies. Some strategies were related to teaching sentences, being able to teach connected words, where children are not just using single words, but putting words together into whole phrases and sentences. Some of these included encouraging children to use complete sentences when they talked about the books. These teachers played audio recordings of Ataya lessons and used those recordings for the kids to hear complete sentences, using Ataya sentences across content areas. So they took sentences from the book, like, "Where are you going?" And they would use that at different times in the day. So they would use it when they're reading the book, but they would also use it at different times of the day when children were doing other things. And they spent a lot of time asking children to repeat sentences and to say them over again. So practicing sentences was part of their strategy. Another set of strategies involved teaching vocabulary. And sometimes this involved translating words from Chinese to Ataya, asking children to label things and repeat single words, connecting those words to children's lived experiences, so labeling things in their life, using Ataya, especially the language from the books, making connections to other Ataya words, using flashcards where they would show children the word or show them a picture and ask them to label it with the Ataya term, and attending to syllables, different parts of the word, saying the word in sections so they could hear the parts of the word. Other strategies involve teaching book reading skills. So this is a literacy skill where they're getting kids familiar with how books work. So asking children to echo read or to read independently, reading the book multiple times so they can hear the story over and over again, pointing to the print so that they could see the connection between spoken words and written words, and using audio and digital copies of the books. There were also strategies that they used to address culture, and these often involve multimodalities. So there would be oral explanations of things that are culturally important, videos, cultural objects that were brought into the classroom, bodily movement, and Ataya stories, conventional folk stories, folk tales that were used in the Ataya community. So these 4 different strategies were what we looked at as we thought about the use of the books in classrooms. This is some of our data, and I have highlighted the places where we see statistical significance in red. What we're looking at here is a comparison of the Mistral school to the SIAC school. So I told you there were 2 classrooms using the books, and here we're comparing how much attention they gave to the different features of the books. And what we found, and I'll go to the next slide, this is the same data, just made larger so you can see it better. What we found was that in Mistral, they spent more time teaching sentences and having them put sentences together and making connections to other Ataya words, whereas in SciAx, the other school, they mostly just taught vocabulary. So what we thought was interesting about this was the different foci of the different teachers, and I'll talk in a little bit about which strategies seem to help children learn more Ataya language. So in Mistral, the teacher spent more time using the books and a higher percentage of sentence teaching strategies. In SciAx, less time was spent actually with the books. They tended to focus on just teaching words. And you can see there she's using a flashcard where she's just showing the word and having the children read it. We did pre and post tests with the children, and some of those tests dealt with target vocabulary, so figuring out what words the children had learned. We would have them listen to an audio recording of an indigenous native speaker speak the word, and then we would ask the child to choose the picture that matched the word that was spoken. These words were all from the books, so they used the books for a month, and then they checked to see which words the children had learned from those texts. There were also target sentences, and here the interviewer showed the children 6 pictures and played audio recorded questions in both Chinese and Ataya related to each image, and they were asked to use Ataya to answer the questions. So here we're trying to elicit connected words. And we scored the words that they said according to this. For example, when asked questions about the book, How is the Weather?, the children were shown an image of a sunny sky. They got 3 points if they answered the question correctly with a complete sentence. They got 2 points if they identified the type of weather in Ataya. And they got 1 point if they provided a partial but related response. They might have said something like weather instead of saying good weather. So here we see the outcome for the children in the 2 classrooms in relationship to what they could identify through these pre and post tests. And this is the amount of change that we see. So here what we saw was with complete sentences, we saw much more in this classroom where the teacher used strategies that promoted complete sentences. And we also saw more connection at the word and phrase level. Whereas if you look at the SciAx classroom, they came up with about the same number of words, but they had much less use of complete sentences. So since our goal was for them to learn language that they could actually use, vocabulary is good, but being able to speak in complete sentences is more powerful and had a bit longer term and more effective. So the children in the Mistral classroom produced higher percentages of complete target sentences, and I say target sentences, these are sentences from the books, and also other Ataya sentences that were not in the books. And they used Ataya words more often that were not featured in the text. So not only were they learning the words and the sentences from the books, but they were using Ataya more and picking up more words in other contexts. The children in the SciAx class, while they percentage-wise of all the things that they said, they more often used isolated words, but they had very hybrid attempts at sentences where they would mix the Chinese and the Ataya together instead of speaking Ataya. The other thing that's really important is thinking about what are the activities that we observed in those classrooms. So we saw some amazing work by the teachers. We had a conversation here at the center yesterday, and one of the things that I agreed with some of my colleagues here was that the teacher is what really matters. And I think that's what we're seeing here, is that the teacher in the 2 classrooms was doing different things. And when we watched the really good teachers, we saw them using a range of strategies in many different ways to get the children to learn language. One of those was using gestures and adding gestures to the book. So as they talked about, where are you going? They would have a gesture that was a questioning gesture. If they had other words, they would use body language to show those words and get kids to do that, because we know that gesture is a way of learning. It's a modality. They used the sentences in other parts of the curriculum. So we had the weather book. Every morning, they would have the child identify the weather. What's the weather today? And they would use Ataya to identify that. They would play games with the vocabulary, and they would relate those games to the images in the books. So these master teachers did a lot of different things. Some other activities that they did was they would send activities home for the children to work on, and reading activities to do with their family members. And this was really important because, as I told you, in many cases the grandparents spoke Ataya, but the parents did not. So we actually have examples of parents who told us that they were learning Ataya from their child and from the books we were sending home. So that was a wonderful, unexpected, positive outcome of the work. They did a lot of role-playing activities. They would take the book, so if the book about weather or the book about where are you going, they would act it out. They would have the different children play the different roles and use the Ataya language to enact the little play that they would put on. They wrote songs related to the books. In the village community, they wrote songs for just about every book, and they performed those songs and did a very professional recording of the songs. So what was interesting in that community is that the school, the preschool, the kindergarten we were working at, was connected to the church. And the church did a lot of performances for the children where they would do Ataya dances and Ataya music and Ataya songs. So the teacher, who was also the wife of the pastor at the church, they would wrote the songs that are now presented. But the most important outcome, and the one that I'm the most proud of, is that after we created the 7 books for the teachers, they have now written 23 of their own books using this process. So the classroom teachers who do not speak Ataya work with the Ataya language teacher, and they have written books on their own topics and their own ideas for the children. So I think that is showing the power of this, because the teachers saw that the children were learning Ataya, and then they wanted to continue this work. We also did interviews with parents, and we asked them, what they thought of the books, especially parents who had, the children had brought the books home. And I wanted to share with you some of the things that they told us. One parent told us, my child would say, Yaya musu sayunyu, which means, Mom, where are you going? Before we had the Ataya books, he always talked to me in Mandarin. However, with the books, he could use the phrases in daily life. Another parent who was not aware that we were using these books in classrooms, she did not know what the teachers were doing. She said about her son, she said, he would say, Yaya musa su inu. Mom, where are you going? Or he'd say, Yapet, for flying squirrel. And to me, or what is this animal in Ataya? And I would think to myself, we seldom talk about this in Ataya with our child. And then he would suddenly bring up these things to us. And later, teachers said they have been learning and using Ataya books. And maybe because of this, he is willing to try. And that is our major goal, is teach them enough so that they're willing to try. Other parents told us things like this. It's like, before my child only knew individual words, now she can speak an entire sentence. Another parent said, my child would tell me what words he had been taught today in Ataya and share Ataya vocabulary taught by his teacher. He would introduce, for instance, the words for animals, millet, of course, in forms of addressing people, such as grandpa, grandma, dad, and mom. And another parent said, the Ataya books promote Ataya inheritance. Many children can't speak Ataya language as well and don't know how to say essential words. From the books, they can learn a lot that they should have known how to say. And this is a quote from the tribal chief in a remote village. Here's what he told us. If they, Ataya languages and culture, do not live, we will be eliminated. We will gradually disappear in the society. So we see this bookmaking project as a good start. We look forward to children and teachers in our village learning Ataya languages from the most basic levels. If they learn for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then our indigenous language can be passed down to our next generation. And that is the chief there in the image that you see. So I want to talk just for a minute about the dissemination of the books. We disseminated the books to teachers who have now been using them for the past 6 years. During the pandemic, when schools were closed, they sent the books home with the children to practice with their families. And since then, as I mentioned, the teachers have used our templates to create 23 new books, and some of them have are slightly more linguistically complicated. So now that the children know what we call the level 1 books, the 7 books that we created, where the teachers are starting to create books that are a little more complicated, that grammatically are a little more complicated, and so that children can learn more complicated language patterns. Several teachers, as I noted, have used the books to write songs, and teachers have also created bilingual books of traditional Ataya stories, so that those stories also live. So this is an example of some of the books that are getting slightly more complicated. So this is a book about fishing. So the level 1 book talks about things related to fishing. So one sentence says, "This is our fish trap." Another one, the next page would say, "This is our fishing pole. This is our fishing net." So lots of vocabulary related to fishing. Then they, on the level 2, they make it a little more complicated. So instead of just, "This is our fish trap," they say, "Our fish trap is light," or "Our fish trap is heavy," right? So now they're adding an adjective. And then at level 3, they're adding a speaker. That student says, "Our fish trap is light." Another student says, "Our fish trap is heavy." So they're creating more complicated books based on the simple books that they started with. So this is still a bit exploratory, trying to figure out how to make books complicated and what order to change the syntax in. Do you add adjectives first? Do you change pronouns? Do you change word endings, verb tense? How are the ways of changing it that are useful to students and help them move incrementally in small steps forward? So this is the free download. This is where you can download these books if you want to take another look. But these are the books that are available. There's no cost to this. Hopefully this link still works. If not, let me know. So now I'm going to turn my attention to a very different but similar project. This is the Cherokee Project in South Carolina, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the Cherokee community. Now, one big difference between Taiwan and the United States is that in Taiwan, every child is entitled to 1 hour a week of their native language instruction. So every child in Taiwan should have 1 hour of instruction every week in whatever language they speak at home, their home language, their native language, their mother tongue. In the United States, we do not have anything like that. We have a few schools that teach children 2 languages, but it doesn't happen for all children, and it certainly does not happen for indigenous children. So in South Carolina, there are no schools that teach indigenous language, and I'll talk a little bit about the history and why that's the case. So there are 3 places where Cherokee has been spoken, and there are 3 forms of Cherokee. So South Carolina is the one on the right at the bottom. That is where I live, and that is where my colleagues work to create these books that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Just above that, that is North Carolina. North Carolina still has a Cherokee language, so they speak the same variety of Cherokee that we do. In North Carolina, there is an indigenous school. There's one indigenous school on a Native American reservation that uses Cherokee as the language of instruction. There's also Cherokee, you'll see on the left, in Oklahoma. And that is where there is a strong Cherokee population, a large Cherokee population, and they have several communities that have indigenous schools that speak indigenous languages, and it is the medium of instruction, at least until children get to secondary school and prepare for college. Then they do more English as well. There are actually 3 varieties of Cherokee, though. There's the southeastern Cherokee, which is where I am. There's the example on the left in Oklahoma, and the language is slightly different there. And then there's a northern variety that is not marked on the map, and that is a variety of Cherokee that is lost. No one speaks it anymore. It's totally gone. This is my student. She's a PhD student. Her name is Anna Howard, and she was raised in a small insular coastal community in North Carolina. She learned Cherokee by listening to her grandmother and her great-grandmother, and her dad encouraged her interest in the language. She explained to me, I will be learning Cherokee until I'm dead. She's been practicing and practicing. It's a difficult language to learn, but she has been my major resource on the project, and she has brought in many experts to help us to write the books. This is our partner Tribal Connection. This is Chief Lamar Nelson, and he is the chief of the Southern Iroquois Eastern Cherokee United Tribes of South Carolina, which we are very grateful. It has become a state-recognized tribe in 2024. So until last year, it was considered a cultural group, but not a tribe. It now has tribal status, which is very important. As I said, there are no schools in my state, in South Carolina, that teach the Cherokee language, and there's only one school in North Carolina that teaches Cherokee through immersion as the language of instruction. There's a very interesting phenomena about Cherokee. Cherokee is the only Native American language that actually has its own writing system. And that writing system was created in the 1820s by Sequoyah. He's known as the father of the written Cherokee form. And he actually was illiterate. He didn't know how to read in any language, but he figured out a way to write down the Cherokee language as the first language that he ever learned to read and write. But he created a version of Cherokee that is still used today and is used in our books. I'll show it to you in a minute. So this is the system. It's a syllabic system. So there is a character for each syllable. It is not phonemically based. So there is not a character for the phoneme. There is a character for the syllables. And it's been used since the 1820s. There's a newspaper called the Cherokee Phoenix that has been printed since then and is still in print. So it's actually used fairly commonly across the Cherokee community in all Cherokee communities, both in the East and in Oklahoma. I was talking to people here about the language forms that you're working on, and they were telling me about how complicated the conjugation of verbs is. Well, Cherokee also has a very complicated verb construction, and I'm not going to try and pronounce all these to you because I am not a Cherokee speaker, but you can see that there are all these different forms and that they're all significantly different depending on which form you're trying to use. So this was a complicating factor in creating the books because every time we had a verb,
Lots of linguists in the room.
so they understand this totally, I'm sure. So it's a very complicated system. So it makes writing the books more complicated because the verb changes sometimes with gender, sometimes with the person that's speaking, how honorific you have to be. So there's lots of varieties. These are 4 of the books that we created, and I'll show you some more about them, but there's a book on birds, different indigenous birds from the area, that the southeastern area that we're in. There's a book on cooking and food, a book on animals, and a book on plants. And again, these were all chosen by the Cherokee leaders that we worked with. So we worked with the chief, we worked with several other people, including language specialists who are very familiar with Cherokee, as well as my graduate student, Anna. So this is an example of one of the books. On the top, you see the Cherokee language created by Sequoia in the 1820s. The second line is Cherokee written in Latin letters, English letters, right? So that's so that if you don't know the Cherokee syllabary, that you can figure out how to say it by sounding it out using letter sound connections that you would use in English. And on the bottom is English, because we wanted the books to be accessible to not only kids who spoke Cherokee, but kids who did not. So what you'll see in this particular book is I hear a blue jay. The next page, I hear an eagle. Next page, I hear a cardinal. So it has all different kinds of birds and talking about the phrase I hear. Again, I hear is a very useful phrase that you could use when you talk about birds, but you can also use for talking about many other things. Here's the animal book, and this is I see a raccoon, I see a bear, I see an elk. Again, a phrase that's very useful. This is the cooking book, and what we have is Grandma is cooking persimmons. Grandma is cooking chestnuts. Grandma is cooking venison. So again, you get the phrase that's repeated, but also learning all the different foods. And we particularly chose foods that were unique to the area and that were used historically by the indigenous people. This is a book about plants. This is the phrase that's used here. But what I wanted to draw your attention to is that the illustrations used here, these beautiful watercolor paintings, were created by Abigail Fowler, whose indigenous name is Spirit Wind. She is the great niece of the tribal chief. So she created these images as a high school student. So we really tried to create images that would represent the community as well. So one of the things that's frustrating about this project is, unlike in Taiwan, there are no classrooms that are teaching indigenous languages. There's no classrooms teaching Cherokee in our state. So we've had to find ways to disperse the books and to find ways to use them, but it's not like we can just give them to teachers and have them use them, because the teachers do not have times of the day where they teach Cherokee. So we've delivered the books to Chief Nelson, to the Cherokee School in North Carolina, and to the South Carolina Museum of the Cherokee, and they use them with their activities. Chief Nelson has been taking the books out to schools when he visits them and talks about indigenous people and communities. He is also an archaeologist, so he often brings artifacts, arrowheads and different things from the community to share with children. But he also brings the books now to share. The books are distributed at powwows. A powwow is a cultural celebration that has artwork and dancing, songs, and we bring the books there and distribute them. As you know, they're available as free online downloads, and the books are now on display at the South Carolina State Museum in the capital of South Carolina. So this is where you can download the books. There's only a link there. There is not a code for you to use. And that is one of the frustrations, as I say, is there's nowhere using the books, so there's not really a space to do research with on the books. So that's a bit frustrating as well. So we weren't able to do the follow-up projects. We have been able to document the making of the books. So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may be associated with this work. Thank you.
تنميرت مسا كونتون ليلي. Thank you for this rich talk. مسا كونتون ليلي تسول في يسار كله تسنم كله انجليز ناض يسترم ادرز مغير المناقشه بلا فهم كله ما استناك اشكرك تفغى واخا راه تفغ يعني ميك تساول ماس كونتون ليلي تساول خف سنة توتلاين تم زوارو تيجات أطايال ليلا نغ تايوان توتلاي تيسنا تيجات شيروكي ليلا نغ كارولينا إيفوس ساوث كارولاينا وكانت لنا مانيك أرساول في تغارس اللي ستسوري أرت السنتا أرت بدو أرت ساوال دميدن ليدرز ميدن اللي ساوال توتلايتن أفدات سكر إدليسن اللي سرت السقرة تاروانسن أرديس نتفق في لي سوجي اللي غير ليسناد من بعد درت تسكاري ليسنا تسكر غايلي متين درافت يعني الكتابة مزوارو هاد ليسان مزوارو من بعد درت نتزرر نسقسا ما يقان تنايتنس نفد الضغط بادل مايان باش هذا سنتي التاوي بالنسبة للشيروكي ارتسكر يدليس نتسكر شيروكي بعدا تيرا اللي ستياري سكرتيان يعني ريسا والشيروكي غا 1820 تاني سكن تغارستان اللي ستاران توتليتنسن يعني ورغازا تيسكرن غيلا درس ستاران ارسكرني يدليس نفت السقران توتليتنسن ماش ديموكريست اللي دارس نيغات تور درسن ورا السقران توتليتات غتين مال ونشكا سنات فخسكرا كلو نتغاوسي وين كرا كلو الخلاصات غيلا راد فغاوالي والنيران استيسقسا ولكن راس نقلك يختكشم واخا ميراني ربي يسول سي شو now I open who can who has any question for the Dr. Kountun Lili can have the floor. Okay, your name please. Your name please.
I'm Philip. Yeah, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. And coming from linguistics, but not from pedagogy studies, I was kind of surprised, like, to see this repetitive structure in the books. But yeah, it totally makes sense when the children are very young. And yeah, what's your opinion? Is there a way, like, to make it less repetitive, or does it really have to be like this? Because you would be able to include more content, and is there a compromise? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely a compromise. And I think that one thing to be clear on is that these are not storybooks. They don't have a story, but children should be hearing storybooks at the same time. So while we're doing the book on animals, this is, I see a bear, I see a raccoon. It'd be wonderful if they're also hearing a storybook about bears and raccoons so that they can hear full, complete language, more complicated language. The idea between the simple structures is to help them learn a few phrases that they can take and use in other places. So yes, you're right. It's not of the caliber of complicated language, but it isolates language into small enough segments that it can be a grounds for starting to learn a little bit. So that would be the rationale that I would give, is that what we're trying to do is to give them a basis of phrases and vocabulary that give them a little confidence and that they can use in communication with other people in other contexts. And then once they can do that, then when they go back and hear the storybook about the bear and the raccoon, they're able to put it together in more complicated ways. They're able to hear whole stories, to see meaning. The stories are not exciting, but they're a way to introduce language.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that I'm sincerely very I would like to thank you. Your presentation is both stimulating and enriching. I have some few questions. The first one, I would like to know if there is some guides for teachers telling them how to use those materials. I mean the books. Second question is about the strategies that you use. I saw that there is some strategies which are linked with using recording, radio, and video. So I would like to have more information about this. The last question is how much this kind of project help to revitalize those kind of languages.
And say that again.
How much those kind of projects help to revitalize those languages.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
For the question about teacher guide, there is a teacher guide in the Ataya project that they have been using. It's in Chinese. It's not in English, so I'm only somewhat familiar with it. I didn't do the writing of it. But the guide is written not only by the researcher at the university, Dr. Shin, but also is written in collaboration with the teachers. So one of the things about this project is just as when we work with the indigenous communities, we want to know what the indigenous leaders want for their children. When we work with the teachers, we want to know what the teachers think and what the teachers see as useful and what the teachers see as powerful. So the guides are written in collaboration with the teachers and the researchers. And the same thing for the strategies I showed you, is those strategies were not strategies that we came up with. We talked with the teachers before they used the books, but many of the strategies they came up with were things that they thought were useful and helpful. So, that would be my answer about the guides. The next question was about the yeah. I think it's revitalizing language if we look on an individual level. So there are children that are definitely learning Ataya, and in some cases, parents who are using Ataya more with their children because we've introduced the project. But is it fixing things in Taiwan? I think it's only a drop in the bucket. It's only a small part of a much larger conversation that needs, well, first of all, they need more than an hour a week in Indigenous language learning. They also need opportunities outside of schools to be able to use Ataya. Ataya needs to be something that's on signs and, in advertising and on TV, and it needs to be in different spaces, not just in classrooms. So that's a part. And then there was a third question, I'm sorry. It's good enough? Okay. You did have three, but. Okay. Yeah, I think I did get the strategies in there.
Thank you, Dr. Kونتون, Lily. Do you have any other questions? إغدار نكرر نسقسي نصدر نسوق للستمازيغ.
Please, I would like to tell us what are the outcomes and the shortcomings studied you in Taipei case and in Cherokee.
It's hard to talk about the outcomes for the Cherokee project because I think right now it's just exposure. We've got the books out there, they're being distributed to children, distributed to families, but many of the children that are getting the books are not children who are Cherokee. So the chief is bringing the books into classrooms where there's many children who are not Cherokee and a few children who might be Cherokee. So, and I think it's important, even if it's not doing it, we would love for the books to be used to revitalize language, but I think in this case, if nothing else, we're letting the children who are not Cherokee know that there's Cherokee people here, that they exist, that they're there. They're almost invisible in South Carolina because until recently there has been no tribe. until there's no land, there's no reservation for the Cherokee in South Carolina. So a child who's Cherokee blends in with all the other children, and people don't even often know, the teacher often doesn't know that they're Cherokee. So it's given representation. It's saying, these people are here, that we need to think about them and we need to honor them. So it's doing that very basic work of awareness, but we have a long, long way to go before it's an actual revitalization strategy. In Taiwan, I think we can say that in the communities that are using these books, that the teachers who are teaching indigenous languages are very pleased and are using them extensively because there are very few materials for young children to learn Ataya. So these are materials. Well, one of the problems in Taiwan is that the children are in a regular classroom, and maybe half the children are Ataya and half the children are Han, are Chinese. So they're in these classrooms mixed together. For a part of the day, they go, for an hour a week, they go with their Ataya language teacher. However, their classroom teacher does not speak Ataya. So the books are helping the classroom teacher learn phrases in Ataya that she can practice with the kids at other parts of the day. So I think the outcome is that we've created a resource, a set of materials that are the basis for not only the storybook reading, but also for conversations outside the book. They're teaching the classroom teacher, the Chinese teacher, to speak a few Ataya words, and they're creating opportunities for writing those songs and and acting out the stories and doing different activities. So I think in those cases, for those schools that are using them, I think they actually are revitalizing language. Not totally, it's not fixing the problem, but I think it's contributing to a good solution.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. كونتون ليلي. إيسي لا كان نسقسي غير لا كان نسقسي نصدر نترجم سنجليست إيه أستاذة فاطمة زهرة.
Miss Katarin, first of all, thank you for sharing your beautiful experiences. We really enjoy it. And my question is that you got a lot of problems, like your students or maybe kids they have a lot of difficulties in to learn this language or maybe dialect. I don't know what I will to say is language or dialect, but what you propose as a solution to let them learn it or maybe love it. And thank you. I ask a teacher and I have the same situation or maybe problem. And thank you.
Yeah, I think what you're asking is any suggestions for teaching it? Okay. So I think the more we can get kids to use language, the better it is. So teaching them from books can be a starting place, but they really have to use it outside of the book. And they need to use it to talk to other people. I'm not sure I'm capturing all of your question. Is there more that I need to understand?
I said what you propose as a solution to let kids love or learn this dialect.
To learn to love it? Yes. I think where the joy comes is when they start to learn enough language, or they learn a phrase or words, and they use it with people that they weren't able to communicate with as easily in the past. So what we hear stories about children going home and saying something to their grandmother in Ataya, and they get that pleasure from that, being able to be part of that community. So I think it's in the reports from the parents and from the grandparents where we're seeing that joy starting to move in. So, yeah. Thank you.
Anyone who has a question or comment? كراو سقسي واخا ستمازيغ نخد عرب تا فرانسيست. Otherwise, I have my own question.
Thank you. Okay, it's working. Thank you, ma'am, for a good presentation. My doubt is We are from India. Thank you, ma'am. First of all, I am asking, we are from India. We are familiar with many dialects and languages. In a multilingual community, how you select a specific language or dialect without excluding others? That's my doubt. Thank you.
That's an excellent question, especially in the United States, because we have schools that have 50, 60 languages in one school. So it's always a challenge. In America, we tend to privilege Spanish as a second language because we have larger numbers of Spanish-speaking children than other languages. But as you say, that's a problem. That's inequitable. So in Taiwan, what they do is during their 1 hour, where all children get native language instruction, the children go to different classrooms. And some go to learn Indonesian because they're Indonesian immigrants, and some go to learn Ataya or another indigenous language. So they separate the children for that hour so they can get instruction in their home language separately. I think that's ideal. I think that's an interesting way to do it and helpful, but I don't think most schools and classrooms have the ability to do that, at least not easily. I guess realistically, you probably can't do a bookmaking project for every language, especially if there's a large number. But you can certainly have children engaging in different texts at different times that represent all the different languages. So it might be reading a folk story, or teaching some words in a particular language, or taking one construct like the sun is shining and figure out all the different ways to say it in all the different languages that are represented in the classroom. This would be called a contrastive analysis, where you would show it in different languages and say, oh, look, isn't that interesting? You do it this way, you do it that way, and sometimes there might be some variations that are similar. So I think there are some things that we can do to make it happen. The other thing that I'd like to put out there about this bookmaking project is the Ataya community and the Cherokee community, they do not need me to make the books. I am the least qualified person to write a book in Cherokee because I speak almost no Cherokee. And I'm very unqualified to write a book in Ataya because I don't speak much Ataya. The books are so simple that you could have children writing these books for each other. So if you have a child who speaks Pakistani, they could write the IC book with different animals in it in Pakistani, and someone who's speaking another language could do it in their language, and another language, and another language. So you could take the same picture of the same book, same bird, and have children write different languages about that same image. So the children can actually write some of these books, and if you got serious and wanted to take those books and put them into the school library, you could have parents check to make sure that the books are grammatically accurate. But I think older children can write them for younger children, but I also think parents could write them for their children. So I think there's ways to create books that would represent a vast variety of language. It would just take organization to make that happen.
Thank you. A last question. Okay, Madam Bouhjar.
Thank you very much for your very interesting conference. What I personally really appreciated, it was the inclusive approach of the project, because you have said that it was a bookmaking with the community, and also you use also the feedback of the experts community also to improve the books and to give the right terminology and so on. The question is, do you think, because you know in America they wrote a lot of books, and you have Basil Bernstein, who had elaborated code and restricted code and so on. Now it is the community who chooses the themes that they are going to talk about or to read and the books. And how do you see the evolution of this for improving the language and revival project?
Yeah, yeah. I think what you're getting at is a really important question about the language of power, right? So we can teach children their indigenous languages, and we should do that, and we should sustain languages. We should recognize that languages that are not the standard are also viable and important and carry meaning and value and culture and all of those important things. But at the same time, we have to recognize that if children want to graduate high school and go to college and get into medical school, they're going to need the language of power wherever they're located. So I think there's ways of doing that where we do it in ways where we don't denigrate the native languages, that we revere them and appreciate them, but at the same time we help children to see we help children to be what's the word I want? We help children to be critical. There's a criticality where the children recognize that I speak this beautiful language. This is my home language and it's important. But I also know that the way schools are structured, it's not fair. And that this language is not privileged and this language is not respected as it should be. But I want to be successful. So I am going to understand that I'm going to need to learn this other language of power. I'm going to be able to need to be fluent in that at the same time. And teachers need to recognize that. So we need to have an understanding, strategic understanding, that yes, I value my languages and it's important, but I got to play the game. So I also have to learn the language of power. So we need to create schools that don't denigrate the indigenous language and at the same time give the children the tools that they need and the opportunities to learn the language of power to participate in the society that we've created. So I think it's teachers being honest, and I think it's letting children decide that this is what they want to do and knowing that they're not denigrating what they bring, but they are adding to their repertoire in order to compete in society.
Thank you, Dr. Kountun Lili. I think one last question. As you know, we started to teach and learn Amazigh language in Morocco in primary schools. So we started in primary school, not in kindergarten. So the question is why you started with kindergarten instead of other levels?
Yeah. I think most of us know that young children learn language at a better rate than older children. So, even if you look at between maybe kindergarten and grade 5, the kindergartners tend to pick up language faster and to learn it more quickly. There seems to be an age where our language learning abilities are a little less and a little less over time. So starting earlier is a good strategy. But we also need to, if we're going to do that, we need to provide them with materials and resources that are accessible to them. So I think it's not just starting in kindergarten, it's also having materials at that level that are helpful. In the Ataya project, we started with kindergarten because I was working with a woman whose specialty was early childhood education. So that's also part of the reason we did it. But I do think there's advantages to starting as early as possible with language learning.
Thank you, Dr. Kountun Lili. Thank you, Mr. Director of the Institute. Yeah, thank you very much, our Professor Kountun Lili, for this very rich talk. Thank you for coming to the Institute. Thank you, Mr. Lili. Welcome to Morocco. Welcome to our institution, Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture. Now, I would like we want to give you a certificate for participating in and animating a workshop in our center. Thank you very much. You can you stand up, please, to have a
Oh, thank you.
So thank you. We invite you to have coffee. غير باش كوني تسكتي غاسكيست لا تينا وتيضنين راستيسكر مس اغوزوم اغوزوم راه يسكر تينا وتخف تمازيغ المالي تماشق اسكا العشرة نزيك صباح بركات دار نختار ميرت استعرضت كنخبركم غير في الاخر بان راه كاينه واحد المحاضره اخرى غدا على الساعه 10 صباحا يقدمها الباحث من جامعه باماكو الأستاذ أغوزوم بمالي أغوزوم حول اللغة الأمازيغية، تدريس اللغة الأمازيغية تماشق في مالي على الساعة 10 صباحا. شكرا تنميرت. تفضلوا معنا واحد استراحة شاي.